Good morning, everyone. We are going to give it 1 minute and then we'll get going. Just let everybody come through. Oh, we've got a full webinar today. Okay, let's jump right in and then everybody can join as they do. A very warm welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. For everyone who's a returning attendee, welcome back. And for everybody who's new, I'm Lauren Howarth. I'm the head of marketing at Zeroe. A very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. A very quick agenda. So we've got Farouk, our CEO, is going to run through the upstream data problem. Then Igor, our COO, is going to deep dive into the fragmentation problem, which will make sense in a little bit. Naj, our climate solutions delivery consultant, is going to talk through why reporting is the byproduct and not the goal, and what good really looks like. And then I'll jump back in later for a wrap. And if anybody's got questions, please pop them through into the bottom there. We will try and get through to your questions as we go. And if we don't get round to it, I'll make sure that we answer your questions after the webinar. Thanks, everybody. Farouk?
Hello, how are you? Thank you for joining today. Before we kind of start off, I think there's probably a very clear statement that we would like to make, which is reporting is not the problem, but data is. I think despite what you see on LinkedIn, despite what you read in the news, despite what you see from, the majority of kind of sustainability posts on social media and all of the noise, this isn't about frameworks, disclosures. It's really about the data is breaking sustainability problems, right? The problem is data, where it lives, how it is captured, who owns it, and whether it is structured in a way you can actually trust. I think this distinction matters because if you misdiagnose the problem, you're actually fixing the wrong thing. And a lot of time and energy is spent on whether we're compliant with this framework or this standard or this regulation that's available coming out in a particular market. But the reality is none of that matters if you're not able to solve the data problem. Now, what is the biggest problem within this? In most sustainability teams and in most sustainability platforms, data is assumed to be ready. And if you're a new sustainability team, and you've been brought on board and say, well, I need to produce a report, the first thing is, well, I got to comply with these requirements and these standards, and I just need to go get the data. If you've been around the block and you've been doing this for a couple of years, the lesson that you've probably, learned, or the thing that you'll probably vehemently agree with, is that it is not ready, right? And any tool that assumes that your data is ready and is built for just reporting is not actually solving the problem that you need to solve to actually report well. Somewhere inside an organization, we assume that somewhere inside an organization, there is clean, structured activity data that can be pulled into a tool and turned into a report. That assumption is rarely stated explicitly, but it is baked into almost every workflow that we see in the market today, right? Give us your data, we'll make you a report. And in most organizations, this is not true. Most reporting tools start downstream, but the real work actually happens upstream. Reporting tools sit at the end of the chain. They're designed to take inputs, turn them into disclosures, because that's their job. But the hardest work happens before that, right? In the months that you spend chasing data, in the people that own the data. And the key challenge here is finding the data across systems and people, extracting it from documents, exports, and emails, cleaning it, classifying it, and reconciling differences so numbers are even comparable. most tools assume that this upstream work has already been done. And a lot of organizations will say, well, we have a data lake and all the information sits in the data lake. Would say 9 out of 10 times when you go and look at that data lake, you realize that it doesn't capture everything you need to report well. You'll find that the data hasn't been looked at because it hasn't been critical to the business. So it is actually inaccurate. And sustainability is the first instance to have to use this data and very quickly finds gaps in this data. And what we find is, in reality, like, this is where most sustainability teams spend most of their time, trying to figure out who has the data, trying to extract it, clean it, classify it, reconcile differences, and get it to a point where they can actually use it. So the real bottleneck is the upstream work. Now, when data isn't ready, reporting breaks. Reporting becomes fragile. Spreadsheets turn into an integration layer. I think most sustainability teams that don't have the data problem tackled will agree that it's templates provided by consultants going to a sustainability team that is being emailed across an organization and filled out by people. It's those people going back to their systems, hunting down information, going back to documents, hunting down information, bringing all of that together, removing all the detail, removing all the magic, putting it into a template, emailing it back. Could be the sustainability team or a consultant chasing that information. And effectively, what have we done here? We've effectively created a bunch of manual fixes that replace structure. And if we're looking at a byproduct of trying to report and take action and make decisions, quality slips. And that's not because people are careless, but that's because the tools aren't set up to solve the problem that we're trying to solve, right? The tool was designed for reporting. The desire of the sustainability team and the desire of the entire initiative was for reporting, but the real problem was the data. And that's why we see that, most organizations' reporting cycles feel chaotic. If we take an example, it's probably February 5th today, and every team is probably trying to hit a Q1 deadline to produce a sustainability report for their management team so they can be released with their financials, in Q1. And what you'll see in the market is, the organizations that kind of have the process down, have chased that data multiple times, will get that report out by Q1. The organizations that are doing it for the first time might be slipping into Q2 or Q3. And when we see that organizations have focused on solving the data problem and use tools like Zeroe, which we've deployed to solve that data problem in organizations, we see them on February 5th having their data, producing a report. And I would say 90% of the organizations we work with today have their scope 1 to 3 done as of now. Yeah. And are probably just chasing the last pieces of data. Now, to talk more about this data problem and provide context around that, I'm going to pass this over to Igor, who's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Farouk, and good morning, everybody. Happy for you to join us. First of all, I will apologize if you hear a lot of music from my side. I live close to a kindergarten, so the kids are currently playing outside now, so please bear with me. I hope it's not too distractive. So going back to the data point, so it's perhaps for some of you, this will be something you've felt directly, something you have to deal with constantly, but perhaps for some it's still new. So it's important to contextualize what we mean when we say sustainability data is in itself the problem, right? Ultimately, when you think about sustainability data, the first thing is that it's just not one set of data, right? It's multiple sets of data. And it's not just one person or one department or one entity that has it. It's usually multiple. So it's quite scattered, right? So with this in mind, we've seen that we can kind of cluster 3 different dimensions of where the sustainability data actually reside, right? So you have what we call these internal silos, which are basically departments of your organization. Then you have what we call a source gap, meaning the source or format of that data actually being very different from one another. And then we have this external complexity that you can add to it if you then consider your suppliers, portfolios, joint ventures, customers, all that into the mix, right? And then if we break down these three little dimensions further on, we start by looking at these, what we call internal silos, right? In some other ways, I like to call this an organizational chaos. So I have worked with over 100 companies in this particular aspect. And it's really a chaotic time of the year, right? It's a chaotic process trying to understand, first of all, what data you need, and then going after people in different departments can be quite brutal. So I do emphasize with and empathize with anyone here. But ultimately, as you can see on the left, right, when you do have a sustainability team, which is not always the case, it's important to remember the maturity of a business. Sometimes you have someone in procurement dealing with sustainability, or you have finance dealing with sustainability as well. Only then, with a certain maturity, you'll have a sustainability team. So the role in this means that I like to see sustainability, let's say, professionals as translators, right? Because in the beginning, they have to really split themselves into many different roles, trying to get particular information that most often than not is in mismatched formats. And it's really complicated to reconcile into a particular system that you're working with, for example. So this whole task becomes a actual nightmare whenever you happen to go and think about, oh, it's time to report again, right? So when talking to these sustainability professionals over time, what I've seen is that quite a lot of them spend most of their time in data collection processes. That gets repeated once, maybe twice a year, depending on how you report. But ultimately, if you think about it, this is a manual process that in theory should be better off handled with better infrastructure, right? So let's keep this in mind. Now, if we go on the second approach, a different dimension is this external complexity, right? So if you think about, okay, if I only need to get information from within my business, that's one thing. But if you do sustainability reporting, especially carbon accounting, you will need data from outside of your business. And then, of course, it adds up a layer of complexity. If you think about supply chains, you have to deal with getting to the supplier, hoping that they actually track some data. If they do, manage it somehow. Utilities and service providers, again, all providing different formats. You may or may not have subdivisions or other entities, franchises, joint ventures. So all bringing in different dynamics, different complexities, because most often than not, probably the same tool might not be used in all of the entities, all of the businesses. Then you have customers perhaps with certain particular demands and requirements. Again, more transparency on a couple of topics, traceability, which is now a big topic within sustainable supply chains, for example. And like I said, with portfolio companies, right? So if you add this complexity to already a very demanding task, it's quite brutal. And last but not least, the source gap that I mentioned earlier, right? So every little player that I've mentioned in this crazy, let's say, pyramid of players, most likely they'll give you a data, a report in a particularly different format that actually you need. So you'll need some time yourself to break that apart and put it in a format that either you can accept or a system that you're working with can accept. And then this is where this gap creates, right? So when you have a source gap, as we call it, to the report, and you cannot really trace it, it's really where this trust starts to break down, right? And ultimately, traceability, especially in sustainability reporting, is very important. And then if you cannot really defend it, you're under scrutiny, right? So it's a complicated situation to be in, right? So especially, let's take one example in this particular case. If you've calculated scope 3 before, you will understand that indeed it's one of the most complex challenges in sustainability reporting, in carbon accounting specifically. And if you take one of those categories into account, perhaps purchased goods, you'll see that there are different players in this dimension, yes? You'll see that you'll be interacting with purchasing data, with procurement. You'll need transportation data that perhaps sits with the logistics, if you have a department of it. You'll have spend data that again sits with finance. You'll need particular emission factors, either supplier-specific ones if you want to be that granular, or just state emission factors. And then you'll need your time to normalize and validate all of that, right? So for one particular calculation that ideally should go smoothly, you're talking about 3 different internal departments from your organization. You're talking about multiple external complexities, again, and perhaps 5 different formats all along the way. So all of this complexity is really something that it's important to keep in mind when we say data and reporting, right? So one thing that I want to keep you, that I want you to keep in mind, and especially as Najd goes a bit in detail on this on the next few slides, is that consider these 3 dimensions that we discussed, right? So functions that don't really own the data, organizations that you don't really control, and then environments that are not designed for reporting. All of this put you in a sensitive position. And how best to treat this is really changing this notion, this mindset that reporting in itself is not the constraint and should not be the goal, right? Like Farouk said, report is just that final output. And what should be really a priority is understanding how you improve processes in order to achieve that, right? So how can you focus on the upstream side of your work so that the downstream feels more efficient and easier for you, right? And Najd will take it onwards with some clear examples.
All right, good morning, everyone. So I think the natural conclusion is exactly what Igor said and what Farouk started with, is that we should not be associating our sustainability or ESG strategies with the final output of it all, which is just the report. I think in place, we should really focus and think about the system or the sustainability infrastructure put in place that allows for real-time insight into or even operational processes. So what I'm trying to say here is that instead of looking at sustainability from an accounting perspective, so once you close out your financial reporting year, then you're really scrutinizing into everything. Sustainability actually should be a continuous process, which would allow you to make decisions as problems arise instead of condensing everything into the reporting cycle and just treating it as something reactive. And I'll tell you what we forgo by doing this actually. So what this looks like, and for anyone who's been part of the sustainability cycle, they know the pains of having to leave everything until the last minute and just being reactive to the final deadline. So you're actually chasing different teams, like Farouk and Igor said, you're chasing different teams from across different departments. Sometimes you're having to engage with external suppliers or relying on approximations. And it's quite stressful for not just sustainability teams, but other departments as well, who just see this as, requests that come in bursts rather than including everyone in the sustainability journey throughout the year. So data collection in bursts. And because we're reacting and working towards a timeline instead of actually leading with a strategy in mind, we often forego quality in order to meet that deadline. So we forgo quality for speed. and then we're just reacting, and we repeat this every cycle instead of being able to make informed decisions throughout the year as we notice certain problems. So what this turns into and what it can actually be, instead of it being an end-of-year problem or a reporting cycle problem, we should actually plan to put in place an infrastructure so that we have transparency into sustainability, ESG, GHG, like emissions, all of it throughout the year. And to do that, all right, and what enables us to do that is having traceable data, is shared ownership. So sustainability and ESG does not become the problem or the burden on one team, but rather shared effort, and to have visibility into the data from source till the final output. So in practicality, what this actually looks like is continuous collection. And this ties back to what Igor told us about fixing the upstream so that the report becomes something more manageable. It starts with continuous collection. Now, our recommendation is that teams do this with live data if it arises, but monthly for more mature organizations, even quarterly, but more continuous throughout the year instead of just a burst of data collection at the end in order to meet some reporting deadline. Or doing this on a continuous basis and assigning roles and responsibilities across teams allows you to do quality checks and validate the data and address any issues as they arise instead of having to, put in place approximations or workarounds at the end of the reporting cycle. And what this also allows you is to integrate sustainability and ESG into your operations rather than it being something that you do for the sake of reporting or for the sake of meeting external stakeholder deadlines or expectations. It allows you to make real-time decisions, whether that's related to the data quality or related to your decarbonization ESG improvements. And then this naturally allows for the report to be a byproduct instead of something, or instead of like the actual focus of your sustainability or ESG efforts. And then all of this would relieve you of the burden of viewing audits. If anyone's done GHG audits in particular, they're a pain, they're such a hassle. It allows for audits to be, seamless because you can trace everything to its source and you have a proper infrastructure in place that allows for any external auditor to come in and trace everything. And the one more point that I wanted to share here is that this year-round transparency should not be something that's expected of more mature organizations. If you start the right way and if you put the right infrastructure in place, then this can be something that you work on from the start, and therefore you have the processes in place, and any organization, even those who are just starting their sustainability journey, can succeed. So the 3 pillars of data trustworthiness, or what makes your that infrastructure or that system that you put in place valid, I would say ownership, structure, and traceability. So let's start with the ownership layer. Like I said before, sometimes it feels like the burden of sustainability reporting is just on the sustainability teams. But if we think about it with other departments or other processes and other kind of deadlines or reports that are produced within an organization, like a financial report, it's not just the burden of your finance department to do that. All departments, all people or teams across the organization are involved in that process, and they take it quite seriously because the systems are put in place. So we have to start thinking about sustainability in a similar manner. Instead of just one team or one person going around chasing people for data, we need to put in place the right infrastructure or the right data collection mechanism that allows that data flow to be seamless. And so you're kind of distributing the responsibility across the different teams. Because even though sustainability team is the one putting together that final report, the actual input data is not from sustainability itself. It's coming from the operational side of the business. The other thing which at Zeroe, we think about this a lot, is the structure or the actual infrastructure or system that you put in place in order to do your calculations in the case of GHG, or your data collection and reporting of ESG disclosures. So this is kind of the process from top-down view. You start with data capture. So how are you capturing this data, and how is the data flowing to the sustainability team or to your system? Are you really collecting and chasing people through emails, and then everything is fragmented and you're having to rely on your on inbox searches at the end of the year, which is such a pain? And how are you receiving that data, and what format? Is it in PDF? Is it in Excel? And even if it's in Excel, it really heavily depends on whoever put together that file, which can be quite a hassle for the person who's having to use the data. So if you improve that, and if you standardize the way that you collect your data, then you're starting your capture layer properly. The next one is classification. Which is if you're receiving something like spend-based data, how do you classify it and break down that data to fit into different categories in GHG? And then how do you use that same data for disclosures that are required in both GHG and ESG disclosures and reporting? And then how do you put in place a system that allows you to check against previous patterns? So any infrastructure or data management system that you put in place should be able to alert you if there's something way off in a particular month compared to previous months. And this is also why we really recommend that you do this exercise periodically rather than waiting for the end of the year or the reporting cycle, because then even if there are significant gaps or even if there are outliers, you're having to really go back and check, okay, what did I do Q1 of last year? And I don't have to explain why that would be an issue for you, because even the person who provided that data probably can't pinpoint why that is the case. And then normalization, this also goes back to how you capture or collect your data. If you put in the right system in place, and if you're doing this or checking against this periodically again, then you can ensure that all of your units, all of the data, the format is coming in a standard manner, and then make or rectify things as they arise. And so that's pretty much how you ensure that your process or that infrastructure layer is set up to allow you to report, or allow for that reporting period to be seamless. The final part is traceability, and this is related to the audits and external verifications, which again can be quite complicated, and you really have to drill down to all the layers and the nuances. So emission factors, the sources of the emission factor, which year, why did you choose that particular emission factor, why did you choose to normalize your data in a specific way? All of this should be captured in a trail, so you can actually trace everything back to its origin, back to the source, and the source not being just one person sharing a file to you over email. The source should be actually where the data got captured from. Whether there's another tool that's being used, or whether you're relying on someone to sit there and check the meters manually, you should be able to trace back to that input or source of the data. And so what do these solve for? If you have the proper ownership or roles and responsibilities defined, then you're not having to scramble every reporting period or the end of the year. You're actually addressing issues and defining those roles and responsibilities so that you allow for kind of shared ownership of the data, and then you're not having to chase people at the last minute to provide something or to help you rectify something. So you're solving for the chaos of the reporting cycle. The structure can allow you to not be, here we wrote that you're solving for year-round blindness. I would say it actually allows you to have proper insights and give you enough time to make decisions if you need to chase the data or change the data, if you need to change your system or infrastructure, if you need to educate people. Because even though we might have sustainability teams, some organizations might not even have that sustainability team, you're allowing for enough time for people to catch up and buy into your decarbonization or your ESG or your GHG strategy. Finally, traceability is so you can be confident with the data once you do actually share it in that report, and once external reviewers or verification comes into place, you're ready for that audit and you can present your data confidently. I think this is it. And the underlying idea or conclusion here is very simple. It's to not really work towards the report, but put in place the right system that allows for that report to be a natural byproduct of everything you've done throughout the year. All right, Farouk.
I don't know. Is it coming back to me or is it going to Lauren?
I saw you unmuted
Very
yourself.
good.
You were eager to say something.
Okay. No, I mean, I was smiling because I think you're seeing people move and go on this journey, right? So you provide a real, I can preach about the theory, but I think you're providing a real first person view of the journey that organizations are going on, and it's very practical. Lauren, where do we go from here?
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, great. Appreciate everyone's input and ideas and trying to break it down. I think what I'll do very quickly is just do a summary for everybody because there's quite a lot of information there. So if we break it down really quickly, we all understand now that the market has spent years building different yet similar reporting tools. But the problem has never been the report. The problem has always been upstream, where the data lives, where it's scattered across departments, suppliers, partners, and then also living in lots of different formats, manual logs, and every iteration possible. The fragmentation is why the sustainability teams are spending up to 80% of their time chasing that data. And that's why everything feels chaotic, and when it comes down to the auditors, you can't find where some of these numbers are coming from. The fix for all of this is the data infrastructure, and this is something that Zeroe is built around. It allows you ownership, it allows you structure, it allows you traceability. If you get those three right, then reporting will become what was always meant to be, and that was a natural output of a system that works all year round. And that's what we mean by the work before the report. And just in conclusion, this is essentially what Zeroe has been built for. We're a data platform for sustainability and impact, and we solve for the full data lifecycle, capturing, ingesting, transforming, and validating data. We essentially turn all those fragmented, chaotic inputs into something that's structured, and it becomes an auditable asset that your team can trust. Now, if any of this kind of stuff resonates with you today, please feel free to reach out to us and we can set up a call and chat about how we can solve your data problems. And that's it in a wrap. Is there anything that anybody else wants to add in? Are we good?
I think we're good. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the questions. And I'll get back to some of those afterwards the session. And everyone will receive a recording of this particular session in your emails to see you then. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.